I was 17 and just finished mopping the floor at closing time and was walking out the door. The owner's son walked across the floor in boots covered in motor oil and told me to mop this mess up. I dropped the mop on the floor and told him to do it himself. I was being paid minimum wage and wasn't going to deal with that stuff. Similar situation. I started at a McDonald's because I was desperate. First day. It's already 2 hours past the time was supposed to go home, but they kept telling me I had to stay and wait. For what exactly? Finally they said sweep the kitchen and go home. I swept into a big pile, was about to put everything into the dustpan when the shift lead came by and said, "Looks good." Then she kicked the pile out and said, "Now do it again." I made myself an ice cream cone and left. Temp agency sent me for assignment to a small factory making furniture. 7 a.m. start time. At 7:03, while still waiting for some sort of foreman, supervisor to come over and say hello. Here's what we do here. Couple dudes start shouting at each other, and it breaks out into full-blown fisticuffs. Yeah, I'd seen enough. Funny how I have a completely crystal clear memory of looking at the clock in my car as I drove away. 7:12 a.m. Me and the entire waiting staff walked out. The new owner of the restaurant I worked for wanted to charge the staff for breakages. It's not even legal to charge staff for breakages, even from incompetence. It's just part of running a business. Day 2. Owner tells me that he pays taxes for us, so he pays cash, and it is after taxes. So 7.5, and not the 10 per hours we agreed to. I walked out and called the IRS hotline to report fraud. I had a lady who owned a Subway do this to me for like 2 weeks. She said she was getting my payroll straightened out, and when I got my check she took out taxes, and she actually never paid them either, so when I did my taxes, there was no record of me working for her. She literally stole my money. Dishwasher. Had worked there 2 weeks. The thtsThreads for kitchen and office both broke the day before I started. Office thtsThreads was fixed the following day. Kitchen thtsThreads wasn't priority. It was a heat wave in August, hitting 115 outside. The whole kitchen staff walked out. I was looking for work and took anything I could find. Unfortunately, the job I found was telemarketing. I hate myself too. Anyway, the work sucked and I hated it. I always took no for an answer, and that got me in lots of trouble. They kept putting me in a room with this old VHS tape on pressure tactics and never taking no for an answer. The tape went for an hour, so I just had a nap instead. Thankfully, I was also looking for work on the side and got a job at the local supermarket, so I knew I had a backup plan. The next time they put me in that room with that tape, I had a nap again, and then when I came out they said, "If you have to go in there again, your position will be terminated." I just said, "I'll save you the trouble." I quit. That really pissed them off because they were already understaffed. Same thing happened to me. Everyone yelling at me or hanging up. Boss pressuring me to make more calls. Took my lunch break and never went back. I worked at a car wash during the winter in the wet tunnel. Manager got in my face for wearing a coat that didn't have the company logo on it, but they didn't make uniform coats. Told him to eat my entire rear end and choke on it, and then left. It gets below zero here regularly. I'm not risking my life or even my comfort for $12 an hour. I was a cook. A new manager kept making me cover dish pick whose dishwasher was not showing up because they refused to hire another one and were making him work 7 days a week. I told him if he kept making me close dish pits, I was going to put my 2 weeks in. He said good, and went back to cooking. So I went and grabbed my shoes and backpack, got his attention. He turned around and I gave him a peace sign and left. Keep in mind I had been there for 3 years, worked as a busser, dishwasher, server, host, cook. I did everything they asked. He had only been out manager for 2 months. Dish tank, only job I ever walked off of mid-shift. We had a new manager who was a lazy jerk and chased the women wait staff. I cooked, did expo, prep, dish tank, and in a pinch I did wait staff, but new manager always tossed me into dish tank. One day, I opened the store at 4:30 a.m. as prep, then cooked until about 3 p.m. New manager comes in and tells me, as I am leaving to get my rear end back to the dish tank, that I am closing there tonight. I told him I opened prep and cooked until now, and that I had things to do tonight. I had a date Lol, to which he laughed. I told him to screw right off and walked out. Got a job delivering pizza for more money and better hours. Screw you, Mark. Dell Computer Sales 1998. They fired 90% of all the commission making salespeople and replaced them with hourly workers from a temp agency. They then asked me to train them. I was like, maybe you should have trained them before firing everyone. Why would I train them so you can fire me in 2 weeks? I then grabbed my stuff and noped out of there. I got a job at a new grooming salon in Apeco. It was a commission-based job, and they still had a sign out front saying grooming salon coming soon. So after a week of making no money, I came into work and the manager said, "You can't wear jeans here." "Okay," I replied, then turned around and walked out never to be seen again. He called a week later asking me to come back. I laughed and hung up. Yes, FedEx Ground was a package handler making $12 an hour. The requirements were insane for the conditions they had us working in. One day, I told my sort manager that I was running to the restroom and he was like, "Come on, man, can you hold it for another 45 at least?" I told him no and went off to the bathroom. I was already fed up with the job, but that was the tipping point for me. I got out the bathroom, walked to the time clock, clocked out, and left. A month later, at my new job, I got a call from FedEx Ground. They were wondering where I'd been. Since I hadn't been seen at work in over a month, they told me to give them a call back if I was still interested in working. Lol. Sure. Aside from being a firefighter, medic small volunteer department, not paid. We all had a regular day-to-day job. Mine was always working in bars, pizza places, etc. Stuff like that. I was a cook. Had one particular manager at the time that would talk down to you, like you were a piece of dog waste. I let it slide way longer than I should have. I eventually said something one day, and it got twice as bad. He eventually got in my face and was legitimately yelling. I basically told him to go away, and that he needs to learn how to talk to people. I walked out that night and left him by himself to run that whole kitchen with at least 10 plus tickets that I know had not even been started yet. This was back in 2016-ish. I heard he called to other employees in on their day off, and I later found out he did the very same thing to them as well, and the end result was the same. They too walked out on him. Fast forward a bunch of years to current time, and a couple other restauranty bar jobs later, I'm back at that same exact place, and he's no longer there. I now am that manager and run the show. I don't care if you're the President of the United States or a homeless guy on the side of the road. I will treat and talk to you the same exact way you talk to me. Everybody is out here struggling. It costs absolutely nothing to be nice to someone. You have literally no idea what someone may be going through. Be a decent human. Had a part-time job for about 40 minutes in college. Started as a data entry job, paid $7.25. The owner found out I was going to school for an IT-related field and starting throwing tasks, like updating his website and basic tech support. I left almost immediately. Yeah, the job I have right now actually, which sounds weird, but let me explain. I work in solar fields as a laborer and have for about a year now after spending the last 4 years doing demo/concrete work. Because of that, my work ethic is pretty strong, and I expect to work when I'm at work. In fact, I'd go so far as to say I enjoy it. Well, this solar site I was at, they didn't have any work. They had 40 guys on site and maybe 10 of them doing anything. Yet they told us if we were caught standing around, we'd be fired. So it encourages a game of cat and mouse with our foreman, who didn't know what the hell they were doing in the first place. So for a few weeks I did absolutely nothing, but spend 60 hours a week standing in a field with a bunch of grown men, talking about everything we could. Felt like I was losing my mind after a while. I desperately needed to work on something. At home I had plenty to do since I just bought my first apartment, so I decided to just leave during lunch, which I had done many times before for the same reason, and because at that point, I really didn't care at all about this job anymore. So I went into the trailer and told my foreman I was leaving at lunch for the day. Then he told me he was going to have a meeting at the end of the day about people leaving early and how he might fire some people. So I said I'd save him the effort and quit then and there. My boss from my temp agency reached out to me asking about it. Got in contact with the foreman and his boss. did some digging, and then somehow the foreman ended up getting fired, and I ended up getting promoted to crew lead with a nice raise. Good stuff, I guess. Doesn't really solve my issue of not having a lot of work, but I guess having a lot of money is nice too. Yes, I've done this 3 times. The first time, it was a contract position. The boss asked me to put in more effort, which translated to I want you to work more hours for free. No, thanks. In the second one, the owner and her husband, my boss, called me into a meeting to yell and curse at me. Put the fear of God in me, I guess, then told me how I was going to report some false information to the customer. Nope, I said. People don't talk to me like that, and left. In the third one, I agreed to work part-time, no more than 4 hours a day, while my wife was hospitalized. The first day, they asked me to work 6 hours, then told me to be ready to work 8 hours the next day. I just left. As a 17-year-old, summer between junior and senior year of high school, I worked at a Target. Job was fine, easy enough, pay was low, but all I needed was money for weed and gas, so it was good enough. And I had a fling with a co-worker that was fun. One day, a very confused, very elderly lady in either a flimsy dress or what I think was more likely a nightgown stopped me and asked me where the toilet paper was. I escorted her to the TP aisle, and she froze in the middle of it and explosively shat herself. She was embarrassed and crying, and I felt awful for her and radioed for some help, never having dealt with anything like that before. A manager came over and yelled at her, threatened to call the cops, and had security escort her out of the building. Instead of having a shred of decency or sympathy for this weeping senile woman, I kinda meekly told him she was ashamed enough as it was, and he didn't need to pile on. He brushed that off, then told me to get a mop. I went to the back and grabbed a mop and bucket. Tried to hand him the mop, and he said, "No, you're cleaning it up." I was just making sure no one came down the aisle. I told him I absolutely was not cleaning up human waste sprayed all over the floor. He smugly said, "Oh yes you are." So I dropped the mop and my walkie in the waste and walked out, left, and was able to smoke a bowl and catch an afternoon screening of The Incredibles at the theater down the street. Definitely the right call, and forget that guy. I was a bar back in my 20s, and I had an incredibly emotionally and physically abusive boss. It was a weekend night, and the bar had 2 floors, and I was the only bar back that night, and there was only 1 bartender on each floor. At about midnight, food orders would start coming in left and right, and that night was no exception. Between having to empty out ashtrays, pick up dirty glasses, clean tables, wash dishes, and make all of the food orders, I couldn't keep up. My boss got very angry with me because I was behind on food orders, and people were starting to get upset about having tables with empty glasses and very delayed food orders. She summoned me over to the bar, grabbed me by the shirt collar, shook me, and screamed in my face, "Just get me through the rest of the darn night, and then you can quit." I was in disbelief and went back upstairs. I looked at all of the tickets I had left to make and just decided that job wasn't worth it. I turned off the grill and the fryers, turned the light off in the kitchen, threw my towel in the dirty towel hamper, and walked out. That was the night I stopped taking other people's nonsense. I slapped a boss who had a problem with his hands. He walked up to me on the first day and grabbed me by the back of the neck, and I slapped his hand away and told him, "You need to keep your hands to yourself. Don't touch me again." Well, he knew I was right and couldn't say anything, so he grumbled and gave me dirty looks for 2 days. Then on the 3rd day, he did it again. I knew he had been pumping himself up to do it, because I called him out and was waiting. I slapped him so hard it made my hand swell up. It knocked him to the floor, and I took my apron off and stood over him and told him to get up. He begged off and laid there on the greasy, dirty floor with his hands up. This was in front of all the other employees. Lol. That's it. Subscribe.